Marilyn Monroe was found dead in her Los Angeles home on August 5, 1962, at the age of 36, and the world was told it was a tragic suicide by overdose. But over 60 years later, the evidence from that night still doesn't add up, and what the official autopsy report actually says contradicts almost everything about the suicide narrative. From the complete absence of pill residue in her stomach to the suspicious 8-hour delay before police were called, from her connections to President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert to the witnesses who conveniently changed their stories, Marilyn Monroe's death is one of the most suspicious celebrity deaths in history. And the more you examine the actual evidence rather than the official story, the more it becomes clear that something very wrong happened that night, and powerful people worked to cover it up. Let's start with what we know for certain about the night Marilyn died, because even the basic timeline raises immediate red flags. Marilyn's housekeeper, Eunice Murray, claimed she noticed a light on under Marilyn's bedroom door around 3:30 a.m. and became concerned because the door was locked. She called Marilyn's psychiatrist, Dr. Ralph Greenson, who came to the house and broke a window to get into the locked bedroom where he found Marilyn dead, lying naked on her bed with a phone in her hand. An empty bottle of Nembutal sleeping pills was on the nightstand. Dr. Greenson then called Marilyn's personal physician, Dr. Hyman Engelberg, who arrived and officially pronounced her dead around 3:50 a.m. But the police weren't called until 4:25 a.m., a full 30 to 45 minutes after Marilyn was found dead. That delay has never been adequately explained. But the timeline gets even more suspicious when you dig deeper. The housekeeper's story changed multiple times over the years. In some versions, she found Marilyn at midnight, not 3:30 a.m. In others, she called Dr. Greenson immediately versus waiting hours. The inconsistencies in her account suggest either unreliable memory or deliberate lying to cover up what actually happened. And Dr. Greenson's behavior that night was bizarre. Why did he break a window to get into a bedroom when he could have just had the housekeeper unlock the door with a key? Why did he call Marilyn's other doctor before calling the police when he found a dead body? These aren't the actions of someone discovering an unexpected death, these are the actions of someone managing a situation. Now let's talk about the autopsy, because this is where the official suicide story completely falls apart. The autopsy was performed by Dr. Thomas Noguchi, who would later become famous as the coroner to the stars. His report stated that Marilyn died from acute barbiturate poisoning, specifically from Nembutal and chloral hydrate. The report listed the cause as probable suicide. But here's the problem, Dr. Noguchi found no pill residue in Marilyn's stomach or digestive system. If someone takes 40 to 50 sleeping pills orally, as was suggested Marilyn did, there would be physical evidence of those pills in the stomach. There would be residue, partially dissolved capsules, damage to the stomach lining from the concentration of drugs. None of that was present. Marilyn's stomach was essentially empty. This finding led Dr. Noguchi to note in his report that the drugs must have been introduced to Marilyn's system through some other means, not orally. The two possibilities are injection or through an enema. Injection sites would have been visible, and none were documented in the autopsy beyond some old marks that weren't fresh. This leaves the enema theory, which is exactly as disturbing as it sounds. Multiple investigators and medical experts over the years have concluded that Marilyn was likely given a fatal dose of barbiturates rectally, which would bypass the digestive system entirely and explain why there was no pill residue in her stomach. But if that's what happened, it's almost impossible for it to have been self-administered. Someone else would have had to do it, which means someone else killed Marilyn Monroe. The position of Marilyn's body also raises questions. She was found lying face down in what was described as a perfectly straight position, which is unusual for someone who overdosed. People who die from overdoses typically are found in irregular positions because they're usually in distress before losing consciousness. The phone being in her hand is another detail that doesn't quite fit. If she was making a call when she died, who was she calling and why is there no record of that call? If she wasn't making a call, why was the phone placed in her hand? These small details add up to a scene that looks staged rather than authentic. Now we need to talk about the Kennedy connection, because this is central to why many people believe Marilyn was murdered. Marilyn had affairs with both President John F. Kennedy and his brother Attorney General Robert Kennedy. This isn't conspiracy theory, it's documented fact confirmed by multiple witnesses and even acknowledged by Kennedy family members years later. Marilyn was allegedly becoming unstable about the relationships, threatening to go public, calling the White House repeatedly, and putting the Kennedy political dynasty at risk. In 1962, a sex scandal involving the president could have been politically catastrophic, especially with Robert Kennedy's organized crime investigations making him enemies in the mob. On the day Marilyn died, multiple witnesses place Robert Kennedy in Los Angeles, despite official denials at the time. Peter Lawford, who was married to the Kennedy's sister and was friends with Marilyn, allegedly hosted Robert Kennedy at his beach house that day. Neighbors reported seeing a Kennedy-esque figure near Marilyn's house. Phone records that mysteriously disappeared would have shown whether calls were made between Marilyn and the Kennedys that day. The official story was that Robert Kennedy was in San Francisco, hundreds of miles away, and couldn't have been involved. But declassified documents and witness testimonies from people who've since died suggest he was actually in Los Angeles and possibly at Marilyn's house hours before her death. The theory goes that Robert Kennedy visited Marilyn that day to end the relationship definitively because she was becoming a political liability. There was an argument, things escalated, and either accidentally or deliberately, Marilyn was given a fatal dose of drugs. The cover-up then involved making it look like suicide, removing evidence, getting witnesses to change their stories, and using Kennedy political power to ensure investigations didn't look too closely. Is this theory provable? No. But is it consistent with the evidence? More so than the official suicide story. The involvement of organized crime is another possible angle. The mob had reasons to want Marilyn dead. Robert Kennedy was aggressively prosecuting organized crime figures, and the mafia had connections to people in Marilyn's life including Frank Sinatra and others in the entertainment industry. If the mob knew about Marilyn's relationship with Robert Kennedy, killing her and making it look like suicide or overdose could embarrass the Kennedys and potentially compromise Robert's anti-mob crusade. There are theories that the mob either killed Marilyn directly or helped facilitate the cover-up of her murder by the Kennedys in exchange for political favors. This gets into deep conspiracy territory, but organized crime had both motive and means. Dr. Greenson, Marilyn's psychiatrist, is another suspicious figure in this story. He had an unusually close relationship with Marilyn, seeing her sometimes multiple times per day, visiting her home frequently, and essentially functioning as more than just her doctor. Some have suggested he was being paid by someone, possibly the Kennedys, or even the CIA, to monitor Marilyn and keep her under control. On the night of her death, his actions were strange. He was the one who found the body, controlled the scene before police arrived, and gave statements that helped establish the suicide narrative. If there was a cover-up, Dr. Greenson was either complicit or actively involved. He died in 1979, taking his full knowledge of that night to his grave. The missing evidence from Marilyn's death is staggering. Her phone records disappeared and were never produced during investigations. Her personal diary, which allegedly contained details about her relationships with the Kennedys and things they'd told her about government secrets, vanished and has never been found. The samples taken during her autopsy that should have been preserved for toxicology were either lost or destroyed. The first police officer on the scene, Sergeant Jack Clemens, later said he immediately suspected the death scene was staged and that he was pressured not to investigate too thoroughly. All of this missing and destroyed evidence is consistent with a cover-up. In 1982, 20 years after Marilyn's death, the Los Angeles District Attorney's Office conducted a review of the case based on new information and ongoing public interest. They concluded that while there were unanswered questions and suspicious circumstances, there wasn't enough concrete evidence to reopen the investigation or change the ruling of probable suicide. But the review acknowledged the legitimate concerns about the original investigation and noted that certain evidence was never properly examined. It was a political answer that satisfied no one but avoided having to admit that one of the most famous deaths in American history might have been mishandled or covered up. Witnesses have come forward over the decades with deathbed confessions and revelations. People who worked for the Kennedys, people who were in Marilyn's life, people who claim to have knowledge of what really happened. Some of these testimonies are credible, others are clearly people seeking attention or money. But the sheer volume of people who've claimed knowledge of a cover-up is notable. Would this many people maintain a lie for decades? Some probably would. But it also suggests there's something to the story beyond what we've been officially told. The CIA and FBI had files on Marilyn Monroe that remained classified for decades and were only partially released through Freedom of Information Act requests. Why would intelligence agencies have extensive files on an actress unless she was involved in something that went beyond Hollywood? The documents that have been released, heavily redacted, show that Marilyn was considered a security risk because of her relationships with the Kennedys and her access to sensitive information. Some researchers believe Marilyn knew things about government operations, possibly related to Cuba or the Bay of Pigs, that made her dangerous to powerful people if she talked. The forensic science available in 1962 was primitive compared to what we have now. If Marilyn's body were exhumed and examined with modern techniques, we might get definitive answers about how the drugs entered her system, whether there were signs of violence that were missed, and other details that could solve the mystery. But her body has never been exhumed, partially because her estate and surviving family members have opposed it, and partially because there's no legal mechanism to force exhumation without new evidence that would justify it. Public fascination with Marilyn's death hasn't faded even 60 years later because it represents something larger than just one woman dying. It represents the dark side of fame, the price of being involved with powerful men, and the ways truth can be manipulated by people with resources and political power. Marilyn was at the intersection of Hollywood, politics, and organized crime. Three worlds where image and secrets matter enormously. Her death, whether suicide or murder, happened because she was caught in dynamics beyond her control. Marilyn's mental health struggles were real and documented. She had attempted suicide before, she struggled with depression and anxiety, she was using prescription drugs heavily, and she'd been recently fired from her last film, which was devastating to her professionally. All of that makes suicide plausible as an explanation. But plausible and proven aren't the same thing. The evidence from the autopsy, the suspicious behavior of people around her, the missing evidence, the Kennedy connections, all of that creates reasonable doubt about the official story. The truth is we may never know with certainty what happened to Marilyn Monroe on August 5, 1962. Too much time has passed, too many witnesses are dead, too much evidence was destroyed or lost. But what we can say is that the official explanation of suicide by overdose doesn't fully account for the forensic evidence and the circumstances of that night. Whether Marilyn was murdered deliberately or died accidentally during a botched cover-up or actually did kill herself but evidence was manipulated afterward to hide embarrassing Kennedy involvement, something more complex than simple suicide occurred. Marilyn Monroe deserved better than the death she got and better than the investigation that followed. She was a talented actress who struggled with mental health and addiction, who was exploited by Hollywood and powerful men, and whose death was turned into decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. If there was a cover-up, those responsible should be held accountable even if it's just historically rather than legally at this point. If it was suicide, her privacy should be respected and her mental health struggles acknowledged compassionately. But what shouldn't happen is accepting an official story that contradicts physical evidence and common sense simply because it's the official story. Marilyn Monroe's death remains one of Hollywood's darkest unsolved mysteries because the people who could have solved it chose not to, and that failure haunts American popular culture to this day.